Before the headline, before the arrest, before the body. Cycles that kill. How does a mother make a murderer? Is it 1 part privilege, 2 scoops of entitlement, 3 dashes of my daughter can do no wrong, and then you just bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 17 years and see what comes out? The internet has been buzzing about the Mackenzie Shirilla case, and what everybody keeps circling back to is the same question. How did it come to this? How does a girl from a middle-class suburb in Ohio, TikTok-following brand deals, aspiring influencer, end up pressing a gas pedal to the floor at nearly 100 miles an hour and kill 2 people she claims to love? What created her? That is the question I am here to answer. Welcome to Cycles That Kill. I'm Dr. Dylesia. This is Season 1, Episode 1, and every case we're going to cover this season lives inside one question. What happens when a mother leaves a door open that should have been closed? We'll be exploring maternal failures as origin points, as the beginning of trails that if you follow all the way lead directly to, in this instance, a crash, in others, a disappearance, and in most, a body and a courtroom. Okay, before we get into it, you need to know who's talking to you, because I need you to trust that what I'm about to tell you is not speculation. And it's also not true crime commentary from someone who just watched a Netflix documentary and picked up a microphone. I'm licensed as a clinical social worker in multiple states. I hold Master of Social Work and Doctor of Social Work degrees, and my doctoral dissertation was focused solely on mother-daughter trauma. Like, that was the whole thing, not a chapter, the whole dissertation. I actually coined the term mother-daughter trauma and have developed several clinical frameworks around it and other mother-daughter dynamics that have gone unnamed in literature. At this point, I've built out close to 30 models, and I'm still going. Many of those models you'll hear referenced throughout this podcast, episode after episode. My specialty is working with women who've experienced a pattern of absence, abuse, and neglect within their relationship with their mother. Not just my mom and I don't get along, I mean the kind of pain that restructures your entire sense of what love is supposed to feel like. The kind that, when it goes uninterrupted, moves from one generation to the next, often so quietly that nobody notices until something breaks in a very public way. And sometimes that looks like a dash cam video going viral. My bachelor's degree is in communication and public relations, which is why I will never talk to you like you need a PhD to understand what I'm saying. I've hosted radio shows since college, I've spoken internationally, and I've presented to audiences from Canada to Eastern Africa to Europe and throughout the United States. I've been an expert on a multi-episode Hulu documentary, contributed to articles in O, the Oprah magazine, and Pop Sugar, and I've been on CBS. I say all of that because you deserve to know who's in your ear. But now we can move on, because this show is not about my resume, it's about the patterns, the cycles, and today, it's about a 17-year-old girl named Mackenzie Shirilla, a 20-year-old named Dominic Russo, and a 19-year-old named Davion Flanagan. 2 of those 3 people are dead, and we are going to talk about why. Now, how did this show come about? Well, I've been building it for over a year, conceptualizing it, developing it, doing what a lot of us do when we have something big we're supposed to put into the world, overthinking it. And then I heard this story, and something in me said, stop. You've done enough planning. This story needs you. So here we are. This case is also personal to me in a way that I'll weave in at the end. Not because I want to center myself, but because I think you need to understand that I don't just study these patterns academically, I have lived adjacent to them. And that's part of what makes this work matter to me in the way that it does. So, Mackenzie. Mackenzie Shirilla was born in August 2004 in Strongsville, Ohio. Middle-class household, 2 parents, Natalie and Stephen, a younger sister, Danielle, who's believed to be about 2 years old at the time of the crash. Dad was an art and digital media teacher at a Catholic school, and mom does not have a documented public or professional footprint, just one random local news reference from 2018 when she called a TV station to report that an Apple charger nearly started a fire in her home. More on that later. But for now, let's get on the same page that the evidence presented suggests that she was deeply involved in her daughter's life. We have a mother who appears to have been very home present, with her identity deeply tied to her family and her daughter. That level of investment in a child with no clear separate professional identity can be a contributing factor in enmeshment. When a parent's entire sense of purpose and worth is organized around their child, the child kind of becomes their career. And that has consequences for how boundaries get drawn, or in this case, don't. By high school, Mackenzie has built a TikTok following. Companies are sending her clothing to review, and she's, by all accounts, a social media influencer. She's also decided exactly what kind of girl she wants to be seen as. According to her classmates and a fellow prison mate, that was a mean girl. And here's the thing, according to them, she wasn't accidentally occupying that identity. She deliberately modeled herself after Regina George from Mean Girls. and like to imitate her openly. Now, if you haven't seen Mean Girls, Regina George is a character whose entire existence is built on social dominance, psychological manipulation, and using relationships as weapons. She's not aspirational to most of us, but Mackenzie saw her and said, "That's who I want to be." And here's where I want to introduce you to something called relational aggression. Relational aggression is the weaponization of power and access by using exclusion, reputational damage, and emotional manipulation to destroy people's social standing and sense of belonging. It is covert, it is calculated, and it is a learned behavior. You are not born doing this. You learn it from what the adults in your life choose to correct and what they choose to ignore. It's obvious that nobody in Mackenzie's life appears to have named her way of being in peer relationships as a problem. Nobody pulled her aside and said, "Baby, why are you idolizing cruelty? What's going on?" And side note, had Mackenzie not been arrested, that probably wouldn't have aged very well between she and her younger sister, as the sister aged and Mackenzie's spotlight at home had to be shared. But let's focus. Here's something she said in the Netflix documentary that I need you to hear, because this might be the most accidentally revealing thing she said in all of it. "I feel like anybody's social media isn't really them. It's how they want the world to see them. And at that time, that's how my 17-year-old brain was wanting to be seen." In this statement, Mackenzie was trying to create distance between herself and her persona. Like, that wasn't really me, that was just my brand. But I need her to stop playing in our faces, because the self you want to project is a version of self. The identity you build for public consumption tells us exactly what you value and what you believe will earn you safety, power, and belonging. If 17-year-old Mackenzie's dream was to be seen as a socially dominant girl who controlled people and intimidated others, that aspiration was who she was working toward becoming, and it came from somewhere. It got seeded somewhere, and it got watered consistently by adults who were supposed to be discouraging it and challenging her towards expressions of self that would not harm others. This is what I study. This is what behavioral epidemiology is. It's looking at a behavior like this and asking, what were the conditions that allowed this to take root and grow? Because patterns don't emerge in a vacuum. And this is the part where I want you to start asking yourself something. Not about Mackenzie, but about the young women in your life. About yourself, maybe. What identities were you allowed to try on as a child? What did the adults around you reward? What did they ignore? Because the answers to those questions, they're quietly running your show right now and shaping how you move in the world, whether you know it or not. Mackenzie started dating Dominic Russo when she was a freshman in high school. She was about 14, he was 17. Her parents knew and they approved. Her father actually said on camera that they were planning to get married. At 14, that they were planning to get married. And I need you to understand that this is one of the first moments many of us watching the documentary begin to scratch our heads and say, something might not be right here. The parents of a 14-year-old girl who entered a serious romantic relationship with a nearly 18-year-old man admitted that they responded with warmth and wedding plans instead of questions. Now, in their defense, Ohio has what we call a close-in-age exemption, known as a Romeo and Juliet law, which prevents someone under age 18 from receiving felony charges for having sexual contact with a minor aged 13 and older. That law embraces the reality of high school relationships like Mackenzie and Dominic's, but it doesn't make intimate contact legal since the age of consent in Ohio is still 16. It just reduces the charge to a misdemeanor offense. I don't want to get into parenting philosophy land here because there are parents who would approve of a technically illegal relationship and others who would not. So I want to stick to the psychological facts. And those are that regardless of what side of the coin you're on, yes, the age gap was okay or no, it wasn't. What a 14-year-old girl quietly learns when the adults who are supposed to protect her see her with a boy who is almost a man and say congratulations instead of slow down. When nobody asks whether this is good for her or only whether she wants it, she learns that her desire is sufficient justification, that her feelings are permission, that if she wants something, that is enough. That's the message that gets ingrained in her, that whether something is legal matters far less than what she feels. And here's why that lesson matters so much. Because that lesson manifests itself 2 weeks before the crash, when Mackenzie is in the car with Dominic and they're arguing. And she says, "I will crash this car right now." And on July 31st, 2022 at 5:30 in the morning, she pressed that accelerator to the floor and she did exactly that because she felt like it. Now, I will say, based on my clinical experience working with clients who struggle with intense rage, I do believe that when Mackenzie woke up and was confronted with what she'd done, she felt it. Anger of that magnitude almost always cycles into remorse. That's the nature of intimate partner violence, the explosion and then the crash. What I do not believe is that she doesn't remember. Dissociative amnesia following a traumatic event is a real thing. It's a psychological response to trauma wherein the mind essentially walls off a memory that is too overwhelming to consciously process. But there is a distinction between that and developing a self-protective narrative. I'm not able to tell you which one it is because I'm not Mackenzie, but as you continue to listen, you'll be able to see that her entire world was organized around avoiding consequences and accountability and protecting her image. So I would opine that it's likely that losing her memory, and I'm air quoting, was just a convenient way to continue doing that. Now, reports from people close to Dominic, including his own brother, indicate that he was preparing to leave Mackenzie. So the question becomes, why does the threat of losing someone create that kind of explosion in certain people? And that's where attachment theory comes in, and specifically something called anxious preoccupied attachment, which describes someone whose early relational experiences taught them that love is unstable, that the people you attach to will eventually leave. For some people, that manifests as a decision to hold on tighter, to escalate, to make leaving more dangerous than staying. The emotional cycling of I love you so much followed by I will destroy you if you go, that's not a personality flaw. That is a learned survival response, and it gets learned early, which means Mackenzie committed to it long before Dominic ever walked into the picture. Now, you might be sitting there thinking anxious preoccupied attachment, but her parents gave her everything. How does a kid who gets everything end up anxiously attached? Because anxious attachment is not just about deprivation, it's about consistency. It's about whether the love you received taught you that you, not your behavior, not your performance, not your image, but you were enough. And when a child is never told no, never held accountable, never giving an accurate reflection of who she is, she doesn't develop security. She develops a self that is entirely dependent on external confirmation, which means the moment that confirmation is threatened, the moment someone tries to leave her, the moment someone tries to hold her accountable, the foundation doesn't just shake, it collapses. Anxious preoccupied attachment is not just caused by neglect or absence. It can actually be produced by inconsistent attunement, meaning the parent is physically present and materially giving, but emotionally unpredictable or contingent. And it can also be produced by the specific dynamic we see in enmeshed families, where the child is given everything except a secure sense of self. Because when a parent never says no, never holds a boundary, never reflects back an accurate picture of who the child is, the child actually doesn't develop a stable internal foundation or sense of self. They develop anxiety dressed up as confidence. Okay, enough psycho mumbo jumbo. Fast forward to 2022. Mackenzie's 17 years old. She moves in with Dominic, who is now 20, with her parents' blessing. Yes, a 17-year-old minor living with a 20-year-old adult, blessed by her parents. No judgment, judgment. And while we're here, her father also confirmed on camera in a documentary that millions of people have now watched that he was fine with Mackenzie smoking marijuana at 17. Actually, he said he was happy about it. Happy. This man is a teacher, folks, of children ages 5 to 14. Let that sit for a second. So here we have a romantic relationship starting at 14 that adults romanticized instead of examined. An underage girl living with an adult man, drug use condoned by a parent who teaches other people's children. What is being communicated to Mackenzie in all of this? That she's above consequences, that her choices will be affirmed, and that there are no real limits. And by the time we get to the summer of 2022 when the crash happens, there's a documented pattern between Mackenzie and Dominic that shows her entitlement and reveals that their relationship is a textbook case of coercive control, which is essentially a pattern of behavior designed to eliminate a partner's freedom. It's the deliberate use of intimidation and the threat of harm to keep someone from leaving you. In a nutshell, it's intimate partner violence. Text messages presented at the trial prove that in response to Dominic setting boundaries with Mackenzie, she told him, "I will watch your back from now on, and your car, and your house, and your life." She also threatened to key his car and to break the handle off the door to his home when he wouldn't let her in. That's not passion, y'all. That is not intensity. That is a young woman who has been taught through years of unchallenged behavior, through a home that rewarded her once without questioning her motives. That threat is a relationship tool. And here's the part I really need you to sit with, because this is the mirror I want to hold up for a second. That fear of abandonment and the behavioral escalation that ensues when one feels vulnerable to being left, that sense that controlling someone is the same thing as loving them, that's not rare. That was fostered in a lot of our homes. That lives in a lot of our bodies. And the distance between I will crush this car and the lesser versions of that same impulse is not as wide as we want it to be. Examples of a less dangerous version of I will crush this car are the woman who checks her partner's phone at 2 a.m. because he took too long to respond the other day. It's the girl who threatens to hurt herself every time her boyfriend tries to break up with her. It's the mother who guilt trips her daughter into staying close because the idea of her leaving feels like dying. It's the partner who picks a fight out of nowhere, it seems, right before the girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, or wife is about to go on a trip. It's the silent treatment that lasts for days because someone dared to need space. It's the "if you leave me, I will make your life a living hell" you think when you don't get your way. Those often stem from the same childhood dynamics that becoming a murderer in a fit of rage do. Sure, no one in those examples drove two people into a wall, but every single one of them is operating from the same place Mackenzie was. The same fear and the same equation. Your proximity equals my survival. Okay, July 31st, 2022. It's 5:30 in the morning. Mackenzie is behind the wheel of her Toyota Camry. In the passenger seats are Dominic and Davion. I want to say Davion's name and hold it here for a moment because if you watch the documentary, you know he's going to get treated as a footnote in Mackenzie's mom's statement at sentencing. And I refuse to do that. Davion had a life and a family and a future. He wasn't a prop, he was a person. And he got in that car and just like Dominic had no idea what was coming. Mackenzie smashed into a brick building at the intersection of Alameda and Progress Drive. Police arrived at 6:20 to find a car described as split in two. Dominic and Davion were pronounced dead at the scene. The car's onboard event data recorder, which is basically an airplane black box but for personal vehicles, tells us exactly what happened. She pressed the accelerator to its full extent and she never applied the brakes. A forensic auto investigator confirmed that the vehicle had not malfunctioned. Everything was working. And the car passed through a directional curve at high speed before its final impact, which means Mackenzie had control over it. The main defense argument was a condition called POTS, posterior orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I definitely had to practice saying that with my husband. He's a physician. Still not sure I got it right, but that can cause sudden dizziness and loss of consciousness. Natalie Shirilla testified that Mackenzie was diagnosed with POTS in 2017, and her legal team claimed that because of POTS, she blacked out at the wheel. I know what you're thinking, so let me be Captain Obvious and say it out loud. If her parents knew she had a condition that could cause her to lose consciousness without warning, why was she driving a car? In the hospital, a detective told Mackenzie and her mother that they were investigating 2 counts of an aggravated vehicular homicide. In response, Mackenzie communicated in what the prosecutor later described as a unique language, comparable to Pig Latin, with which she used to ask her mother if they could tell the police she had a seizure. Her mom said, "We can." In the hospital, within hours of the crash, 2 people are dead, and Mackenzie's instinct, her first instinct, was to manage her story. And Natalie didn't tell her to stop. She sat in it with her, revealing herself as a co-regulator of a false narrative. Mackenzie was formally arrested a little over 3 months later on November 4th, 2022. When the detective told her she was being charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, her expression was blank. Then, as officers cuffed her, she pouted and asked if they would be careful with one of her bracelets so it wouldn't break. Then, when she arrived at the station for booking and was told to remove her jewelry, she cried. Let me remind you that she did not even cry when she was told she was being charged with murder, but she cried about her bracelets. Her family later said the bracelets were gifts from Dom, which is why she was protective of them. And I want to give some space. I want to give grace because grief can attach to objects. That is real and that is human, but here is what cannot be justified. Her emotional response to the murder charge was flat. Nothing moved, no tears, no breakdown, no visible reaction at all. Clinically, we call that blunted affect, when someone shows little to no emotion in a moment that should produce one. I do want to be careful here though, because what someone shows on the outside tells us nothing about what happened on the inside. But what we can speak to is what was visible, and that's the sudden emotion attached to her bracelet. Suddenly she became upset. Suddenly she displayed feelings, and it was all over a piece of jewelry. Now, I've read a lot of online commentary, and the biggest question about this is why? Well, because those bracelets were a part of her image, and a threat to her image was the only thing her system knew how to evoke emotion about. Think about it. Dom tried to leave her. That wasn't just a breakup, it was an image threat. Because if he left her, what would that say about her? That she wasn't enough? That she was replaceable? That someone could walk away from her and survive it, or worse, be better? That is not a heartbreak response. That is an image response. The bracelets, Dom potentially leaving, we witnessed it multiple times. Her system only activates when she is at risk of being seen differently than she wants to be seen. Now, on one hand, the neural pathway for consequence-based emotion was not built for Mackenzie. That pathway gets built the same way every other pathway gets built, through experience, through repetition, through a consequence actually landing and being felt. But because consequences were constantly removed from Mackenzie before they could register, since her parents were always there to absorb the impact, the pathway stayed underdeveloped. On the other hand, though, evidence we'll later get to reveals that Mackenzie did not view her murder charges as consequences. She viewed them as fast tracks to the platform she'd been building. She didn't react to going to jail because she didn't see jail as a loss, because she values visibility, and jail was a stage. From the crash in July 2022 to her arrest in November 2022, Mackenzie's documented public behavior shows essentially zero disruption to her social life. She went to a concert in a wheelchair while she was still recovering and posted about it. She danced, she partied, she kept posting TikToks. And then, and I genuinely need you to prepare yourself for this one, she and her friends dressed as corpses for Halloween. Corpses. 3 months after killing 2 people. At sentencing, the prosecution showed her TikTok content as evidence of what they called, and I'm quoting, a shocking lack of remorse. Now, I want to be honest with you clinically here. Grief does not always look like withdrawal. Sometimes people perform normalcy because it's the only way that they know how to survive. I'm not saying she felt nothing. The Halloween costume, though, that is something else. That moves into a space that is genuinely hard to explain charitably. Because dressing as a corpse months after killing 2 people while their families are still in the acute stages of grief is not a lapse in judgment. That is tone deafness at a clinical level. And tone deafness at a clinical level has a name. It is an empathy deficit. Not an inability to feel, we already established that her system can feel, but an inability to feel to extend emotional awareness outside of self and into the experience of another person. That is a lack of home training, because you aren't taught to have empathy for others when you were raised by parents who didn't require you to consider anyone but yourself. Okay, this is the part of the episode where I need you to be emotionally seated. The prison phone calls between Mackenzie and Natalie become public. And there's something else, child. And not just because they keep having incriminating conversations in an adjusted version of Pig Latin, like we're dumb and won't figure out what they're saying. Call 1. Mackenzie asks her mother if her story is all over the world. Natalie tells her it's been covered in the Daily Mail. Mackenzie laughs. She says, yes, it's world news. And then she says, maybe Kim Kardashian will reach out. Her mother giggles and says she hopes that happens. Y'all, this girl is in prison and her mother is on the phone with her giggling about Kim Kardashian reaching out, not redirecting her, not saying, baby, that's not what you should be focused on. Your boyfriend and friend are dead and the world thinks you did it, so you could be in jail for a very long time, but giggling with her. The thought of being infamous excited Mackenzie, which is yet another sign that her value system does not revolve around merit, love, or character. Her values are around being seen, being known, and being important. That's what we call narcissistic supply. The need for attention and validation is the primary fuel and organizing force of self. And the source of that attention, whether it's a brand deal her and her mom attempted to facilitate from her hospital bed, or a murder conviction, is irrelevant. The attention is the point. The visibility is the value. How it happens, they could care less. Mackenzie did not develop that value system alone. She developed it in a home where her innate desire to be unchecked in the center of gravity was validated, rewarded, and is to this day still being reinforced by her mother. Y'all, stuff like this gets my wheels spinning. I love to envision what a household may have operated like leading up to a tragedy. And in this case, all signs point to Natalie not parenting Mackenzie, but wanting to be her, or at the very least wanting Mackenzie to like her. Natalie does not present herself as a mother operating from authority, rather from the desperate need to be approved of by her own daughter. That is a mother who somewhere along the way decided that her daughter's endorsement was more important than her daughter's development. So instead of parenting, she spent Mackenzie's childhood auditioning for her friendship, which means Mackenzie never got a mother, she got a fan. And a fan will never tell you no or hold you accountable. Catch this, because a fan needs you to stay exactly who you are so they have someone to admire. Now this is deep, but I need you to follow me, because what I'm saying is that Natalie's enabling wasn't just a weakness or a blind love, it was self-serving. Because if Mackenzie had changed, if she'd become accountable, humble, or regulated, then Natalie would have lost the girl she was living through. She would have lost the closeness, the reflected glory, the identity she built around being the mother of this girl. Another call. Natalie says to Mackenzie, we just have to keep everything on the surface, okay? Or we can't fight for you. If we screw up and say things that can be used against us, we can't fight for you. Then you can start writing your book. A book? Natalie is actively coaching her convicted daughter on information control. She's planning a book deal from a prison phone, while Dominic and Davion's families are living with what Mackenzie did to them every single day. This is what parental enmeshment looks like at its most extreme. We talked about it briefly earlier, but enmeshment is the clinical term for when the boundary between a parent and child collapses. When the parent cannot access their own independent perspective because they are so fused with their child's identity, their child's narrative, their child's needs, that they lose the ability to hold their child accountable. The enmeshed parent does not correct distorted reality. They co-inhabit it. They reinforce it. They giggle about it. We keep asking what created Mackenzie, and the answer keeps pointing back to her mother. But here's the question underneath that question. What created Natalie? Now, this is where I want to introduce you to a clinical framework I created called origin mapping, where we zoom out from the maternal behavior experience, in Mackenzie's case, enablement, to who the mother was before she became a mother, from the harm to the upbringing that produced it. Every origin map moves through 3 stages: the pain, what a mom likely experienced in her own formation that shaped her relational template, the belief, the survival conclusions she drew from those experiences, and the transfer, the direct line from her pain and the worldview she constructed because of it, to the specific behavior that manifested in her relationship with her daughter and how that behavior impacted her daughter's actions. Women who pacify their children, who refuse to discipline, who protect their child from consequences, who identity fuse, those women did not arrive at that behavior alone. Over-identification with a child is always rooted in something. Usually it's because your own mother was harsh and you grew up in an environment where love was conditional and had to be earned or protected. So you made the choice that when you became a mom, you'd love without bounds and never let your child feel invalidated by you. In Natalie's case, that might have looked like a decision to protect Mackenzie from being upset, even when what was upsetting her was the truth. Now let's get into the trial, a 4-day bench trial with Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, no relation to Dominic, presiding. Mackenzie was found guilty of 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, drug possession, possessing criminal tools. Judge Russo called Mackenzie literal hell on wheels, and she said, "This was not reckless driving, this was murder." The video clearly shows the purpose and intent of the defendant. She chose a course of death and destruction that day. At sentencing, Mackenzie addressed the court and called Dominic her soulmate. She said she hoped one day people would see she never meant to do this. She even shook her head during victim impact statements. And then her mom tricked off their performance. She stood before the judge with her hands in prayer position and asked for leniency for Mackenzie. But in the same breath, she referred to Davion as Mackenzie's new friend, as in he was peripheral. Y'all, that is dehumanization by diminishment. And it is so telling because it shows you exactly who this family has been conditioned to see as the center of the universe. Mackenzie. Mackenzie, Mackenzie, Mackenzie. Everybody else is just supporting cast. Judge Russo gave Mackenzie 2 concurrent 15-year to life sentences to serve at the Ohio Reformatory for Women, with her earliest parole eligibility set for October 2037. Now that the verdict is in, let's go back over what was normalized in this home. A relationship at 14 with a 17-year-old, romanticized and affirmed without examination. Drug use at 17, condoned and celebrated. An underage girl living with an adult man, blessed without question. A social and media identity built on cruelty and dominance, unchallenged. Coercive, threatening behavior toward a romantic partner, including threatening to crash a car with him inside. And no documented adult intervention ever. That conditioning produced a young woman who never learned that her choices had a real cost, who had been taught through consistent affirmation and the omission of accountability that her wants were more important than anything else. That bred the instinct in her to escalate to violence when she received relational consequences. And that violence killed 2 people, but did not trigger empathy in her. It triggered an immediate pivot to narrative management, image protection, and then excitement about the potential of fame. What the parental response after the crash confirmed is that none of this was new. The coaching in the hospital, the secret language she and her mom assumed the entire world was too dumb to decode, the book deal planning, the Kim Kardashian giggles, the Davion was a new friend, all of it is consistent with what came before the crash. It is the same parenting, the same dynamic, the same value system, just with a bigger stage and a brighter light. The crash did not change who Mackenzie and her parents were, it revealed who they've always been. That is the cycle that killed. I told you at the top of this episode that I had a personal draw to this case. When I was a teenager, I was in a situation that was legally referred to as a kidnapping. A girl in my orbit, someone who wanted to belong to a particular friend group I was in, set me up. I later found out her initial plan was to lure me to her house where her sisters would be waiting to jump me. I declined the invitation, and a couple weeks later, what actually happened was that I was vulnerable, getting off work without a ride home because I always needed a ride home since my mom would never give me one, and she offered. So I got in her car. And while I'm not going to tell the whole story today because this episode belongs to Dominic and Davion and the people who love them, here is what that experience gave me. A very early, very embodied understanding of how vulnerability resulting from mother-daughter dysfunction and social dynamics can blend and become dangerous. It also taught me how a girl who wants power can use violence to increase her social standing. I could have been Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. May they rest in peace. I'm Dr. Dylesia, and this is Cycles That Kill. See you next time.